So the biological clock is, always ticking. But have you ever wondered why some people seem to age like fine wine while others, well, age much faster? Today, we are opening the case file on early life choices and cellular decay to see exactly what our DNA reveals about biological aging. Hey, welcome back. I'm Maple, your emotionally undercooked host who still thinks biological aging is what happens when you leave avocado toast in the fridge too long. If you're new here, we take dumb science, overthink it, and pretend we're smarter than the researchers. Today's victim is a team at Shandong University who decided the world needed a peer-reviewed way to say, maybe you shouldn't have peaked in 10th grade. They've sought to answer a pretty wild question. How do the choices we make in early adolescence leave lasting signatures on our genome literally decades later? They crunched a giant biobank, looked at age of first sex, then ran it against these fancy clocks. Phenoage, telomere length, grim age, all the stuff that tells you you're 32, but your liver is filing for retirement. Finding, earlier debut correlates with faster biological aging. Not you will die, just on average your cells act older. Cue the internet screaming about morals, parenting, and whether TikTok is a contraceptive. My take? Of course, Shandong found this. They have the data, they have the time, and apparently they have zero chill. Okay, so let's dive into the methodology here. To solve this mystery without just relying on people's flawed, hazy memories, the researchers used this forensic-level technique called Mendelian randomization. Basically, they look at naturally occurring genetic variants that act as proxies for early sexual initiation. This lets them sidestep those messy, confounding variables that usually completely ruin observational studies, helping them figure out if this is a direct, causal link or just two things connected by a seriously sketchy third factor. Look, correlation is not causation, but it's also not your mom telling you to wait. The study controlled for smoking, drinking, BMI, income, the usual suspects that make you age like milk. Still, early starters looked a few years older biologically. Why? Probably not the act itself. It's the baggage that comes with it. Earlier sex tends to track with earlier stress, less education, riskier friends, worse sleep, and more I'll figure out birth control later energy. Your body doesn't care about your Spotify breakup playlist, it logs cortisol. Also, let's be honest, society loves to punish early starters twice. First, you get the awkward health class video. Then, 15 years later, a scientist in a lab coat tells you your epigenetic clock is sprinting because you thought cargo shorts were sexy in 2009. It just brilliantly illustrates how behavioral and social choices during adolescence cast a very long physiological shadow, revealing themselves in our epigenetic markers decades later. Does this mean waiting until marriage gives you immortality? No. The effect size was modest, like you might look 35 at 34, not you turn into a raisin at prom. And the researchers were careful to say social environment mediates a lot of this. Translation, structural factors like poverty and environmental stress age you faster than bad decisions do. My sarcastic public health advice? If you started early, congratulations, you're already ahead on experience points. Just stop vaping, get some sleep, and maybe don't treat energy drinks as a food group. Managing your overall lifestyle is huge. Your telomeres will thank you more than abstinence lectures ever did. Quick break to sell my soul. If you like me ruining studies for you weekly, hit subscribe. Leave a 5-star review or a 1-star with a creative insult. I read both for ego damage. Share this with that friend who brags about losing it at 14 and now buys anti-wrinkle cream in bulk. It helps. All right, getting back to it. What exactly is driving this cellular wear and tear? Does the early event itself cause faster aging, or is there a larger mechanism at work? Getting back to the scene of the crime, the Shandong researchers didn't just point fingers and run. They screened 145 candidate pathways to figure out the how, and they narrowed it down to 4 main accomplices that actually mediate this accelerated aging. If the mechanism were simple, you'd expect a tight little pathway, right? Instead, we get a diffuse web spanning decades of human life. Let's look at the official suspect lineup. Looking at the breakdown, frailty is the absolute mob boss here. It takes up a massive 63% of the effect by capturing accumulated lifetime health deficits. Meanwhile, miserableness, which, by the way, is a genuine clinical term used in the data, runs away with 26% of the effect. Let's pause and talk about that miserableness metric for a second. It's measured in the UK Biobank data and captures persistent low mood and negativity. It basically sits right next door to depressive symptoms. There's growing evidence that this kind of chronic depression actually accelerates biological aging through inflammatory and epigenetic mechanisms. So, the psychological stress of your youth and the physiological state of your cells are totally entangled here. Then you have the otter pair in our suspect lineup, COPD and ADHD. For COPD, it actually makes total sense when you track the cluster of risk-taking behaviors. Earlier initiation often clusters with smoking, and COPD is essentially accelerated lung aging driven by chronic inflammation. And then there's ADHD, where early impulsivity shadows you right into adulthood, bringing along worse cardiovascular outcomes and even lower life expectancy.
But a good detective knows the evidence can be tricky. We have to talk about horizontal pleiotropy. These genetic variants they used, they aren't just a simple have-sex early switch in your DNA. They reflect broader developmental factors like pubertal timing, social environment sensitivity, and general impulsivity, meaning these variants could affect your aging through completely unrelated biological pathways. The authors ran checks, for sure, but it's a massive caveat you have to keep in mind.
One insightful reader actually pointed out a brilliant angle on this. This whole thing is probably less about a single teenage decision and way more about a life course pattern. The genes that nudge kids into earlier experiences might also flag a chronic hunting mode. It's a persistent pattern of drive, impulsivity, and stress that simply wears the body down through wear and tear over decades. It's not the single event, it's the engine running too hot for too long. So, the crucial point of this life course epidemiology is a big question. Can we undo the compounding damage? Can we target these mediating factors, the mood disorders, the lung diseases, the frailty trajectories, before they're totally locked in? The researchers suggest that interventions across the life course, like targeted mental health support for at-risk teens, might actually slow down that biological clock. And just for the record, before anyone asks, yes, the researchers ran sex-stratified analyses. While there were some modest individual differences, the overall grim conclusion applied with consistent directions of effect to both men and women. I do need to flag, though, the study population was entirely of European ancestry, so whether the specific genetic architecture holds up globally, well, that's still an open case file.
Ultimately, this research suggests our earliest choices are intertwined with lifelong physiological patterns. But how early do we need to intervene to protect our future health? That's it. Shandong University says early action might equal early aging. Science says maybe. I say blame capitalism and moisturize. Big thanks to my producer, FireflyHaku, who claims he waited until 33 and still has the knees of a retired linebacker, so the data checks out. I'm Maple. Go drink water, call your mom, and try not to age in dog years before next Tuesday.